So today, I'm here to talk to you about a problem that we have, a very serious problem. And that problem is our diet. As it stands today, about 60% of Canadians are either overweight or obese. Now, this is a very troubling number, as being overweight or obese can contribute to diseases such as cardiovascular disease, stroke, or diabetes, all of which are not just detrimental to our personal health, but they place a large burden on our healthcare system. Now, two of the main factors that go into our body weight are the way that we eat and the way that we exercise. Another disturbing statistic is that diet and exercise plans in Canada currently have about an 85% abandonment rate after only 3 months. Now, what these two statistics are telling us is that we're not eating right. And who can blame us? With the overwhelming amount of diet literature that exists, the Atkins diet, the paleo diet, the ketogenic diet, how do I know which diet works best for me? Well, ultimately this comes down to trial and error. Now, trial and error is not just ineffective and often inefficient, but it's also expensive. It leaves us feeling confused and frustrated, ultimately hopeless with healthy eating. But to understand why these diet plans aren't working, we need to understand what they all have in common. And the common denominator between all of these plans is that they're a one-size-fits-all approach. Today, I'm here to tell you that one size does not fit all. Every single person sitting in this room right now is remarkably unique. And in order to understand what makes us so unique, we need to look at our genes. Oh, sorry, not the kind made of denim, but the kind that are made of DNA. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the next frontier of personalized health, your genetics. Now, not only do your genes determine the color of your eyes and the color of your hair, but they also contribute to traits such as the way our bodies react to and metabolize different foods, such as fats or carbohydrates. Now, our genes are made of a substance called DNA. DNA, simply put, serves as a blueprint or a set of instructions given to our bodies. Now, it consists of a sequence of 3.4 billion nucleotide base pairs. These are smaller molecules. The sequence of these base pairs determines the instructions given to our bodies. Slight variations in our sequences are what make us unique as individuals. These are often called SNPs or SNPs. But these can also change the way that our instructions are given to metabolize foods. For example, 3 different individuals harboring 3 different genetic variations might show a wide response or a wide range of response in the way that we metabolize carbs, making some of us metabolize carbs fast while others metabolize them much more slowly. Now, before I go any further, it's important to note that these are complex traits that we're talking about. This means they're not just determined by your genetics. It's a combination of your genetics and your environment that work together to determine your overall predisposition. And what we want to do is use your genetics to shape the optimum environment for your unique body. And luckily, modern science has enabled us to do this. We're now able to hack into your DNA and unlock your genetic code to see what makes you so unique. We can then use this information and quantify it to create what's called a genetic prediction score. These genetic prediction scores tell us how adept our bodies are at certain traits, such as our ability to break down carbs. However, it's not just carbs that we can measure. There are several traits, including our response to fat, our sensitivity to molecules such as lactose, alcohol, or caffeine, or the way that we respond to vitamins, such as vitamin B, D, or omega-3 fatty acids. We can also measure traits relating to exercise, such as your potential for power, strength, or endurance, your response to interval training, or the overall health of our bones and joints. We can measure environmental factors, such as our predisposition to anxiety or our peak alertness. Are we morning birds or night owls? We can also look at things like altitude adaptation. Now, there are many companies that offer this service. However, few of them provide any useful information. And this is because their gene scores are not accurate. We at Gene Blueprint pride ourselves on using only the most advanced and up-to-date science to create our genetic prediction scores, giving you the most useful information to implement into your diet and exercise strategies. These pillars can be broken down into 4. The first is the polygenic gene score. The second is the genome-wide association study. The third is data analysis using machine learning algorithms. And the fourth is an ethnicity adjustment. So now I'm going to talk about each of these pillars and why they're so important to accurately quantify the variation in our DNA. And let's start with the first and possibly the most important, the polygenic gene score. Now, the gentleman you see behind me on the screen is named Sir Ronald Fisher. He was easily one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century. He was one of the first mathematicians to apply the field of statistics into genetics. And his main hypothesis was that the vast majority of human traits, such as our ability to break down fats, are not just the result of one or a couple of genetic variants, but the result of many, hundreds or thousands of genetic variants, known as the polygenic theory. Now, the old paradigm was that if you had one version of a gene, you'd be tall. If you had another version of a gene, you would be short. Well, we've learned the hard way that this is indeed incorrect. And the vast majority of human traits are indeed polygenic. So the only accurate way to measure these genes are polygenic scores, which we are the only group currently doing. Let's make an analogy to trees. So the number of roots anchoring the tree into the ground is indicative of the number of genetic variants included in the score. Monogenic gene scores only have a couple of roots anchoring the trees in, while polygenic scores have a rich and robust root system, allowing them to grow. The overall size of the tree is indicative of the predictive capability of the gene score. Now, we've shown that polygenic gene scores are at minimum 14 times more predictive than monogenic gene scores. Therefore, they're the only acceptable way to truly quantify the variation in your genome. The next pillar is the genome-wide association study. This is a tool that's revolutionized the field of modern genetics. It allows us to determine which genetic variants are associated with which traits, such as an increased ability to metabolize carbohydrates. It does so by leveraging extremely large population sizes, up to 500,000 people, each of whom will have genetic information extracted from them. We can then sift through this data to find statistically significant correlations between certain genetic variants and certain traits, such as a low or a high carb metabolism. Well, these studies are wonderful, but they produce astronomically large amounts of data. The most scientifically advanced and up-to-date way we have to analyze this data is through machine learning algorithms. Now, machine learning is a form of artificial intelligence that's designed to handle big data. We're currently working with groups such as IBM and their Watson platform to not only further improve the accuracy of our gene scores, but to see how they can be implemented based on your dietary preferences and restrictions. The fourth and final pillar is the ethnicity adjustment. Now, different genes are observed in different frequencies in different ethnic populations. This is known as population stratification. If we don't correct for this, the predictive power of our scores will be limited in one ethnic group over another. And what we want to do is create an ethnically diverse gene score that's just as powerful for any individual. Okay, enough about the science. Let's look at how we can implement this to fine-tune your data, or your diet. So, our carbohydrate sensitivity score is based off your glycemic index, which is essentially a measure of how long it takes your body to break down carbs. Somebody with a relatively high score of 75 out of 100 would have a much higher leeway for a high carbohydrate intake than somebody with a low score. We can then use our team of registered dietitians and Olympic coaches to analyze this information and to fine-tune the amount of carbohydrates included in your daily caloric intake. The same can be done for fats. This score is based off the amount of triglycerides circulating in your blood after consuming a fatty meal. Now, somebody with a low score would have a higher amount of triglycerides in their blood after consuming this fatty meal than somebody with a high score. Again, We can use this data to fine-tune the amount of fats included in your macronutrient breakdowns to design something that's optimal for your unique body. Ultimately, with precision nutrition like this, we're ushering out the age of one-size-fits-all approaches, and we're ushering in a new age of tailored dieting. Now, ultimately, this process is complex. It involves many moving parts, but it can be broken down into 3 separate stages. First is hacking into your DNA to determine which genetic variants make you unique. We then use our computational algorithms to analyze all this information, and while working with our team of health and nutrition specialists, we can use it to design precision exercise and diet plans that are unique to each individual. Ultimately, no 2 individuals are the same. Therefore, no 2 diets should be the same. We can use this information to create exact macronutrient breakdowns for each person and design their meal plan based on these by listening to what your DNA is telling us. Now, let's look at what goes into one of these gene scores. I'm going to give you 3 examples of genetic variants that we measure and how they have an effect on your carbohydrate metabolism. So the first gene is GCP62. It stands for an enzyme called glucose 6-phosphate catalytic subunit number 2. It's quite a mouthful, but simply put, it helps to build up and break down glucose in our bodies when our levels are low or high. The genetic variant, or genotype, that I have is found in 35% of my ethnic population. This genotype has been associated with the enzyme doing its job at a slightly increased rate, therefore increasing my carbohydrate tolerance. The next gene is called GCK. It stands for glucose kinase. And what this enzyme does is acts as a sensor that kickstarts our metabolism when we have a high intake of carbohydrates. So again, the genotype that I have is indicating that this enzyme is working at a slightly increased efficiency, predisposing me to having a higher tolerance for carbohydrates. And finally, we have TCF7L2. This gene encodes for a protein that's involved in the secretion of insulin, another essential molecule when our bodies are processing glucose. Again, my genotype is found in 56% of my ethnic population and predisposes me to a higher carbohydrate metabolism. Now, all of these genotypes have a protective effect on my carbohydrate metabolism, increasing my score. Other genotypes could indicate that these proteins maybe aren't doing their job at such a good level, which would lower your score. So another thing that's important to note is that these scores are relative. Just because I have a score of 100 or 0 doesn't mean my body will process all or none of the carbohydrates that I intake, but it's relative based on the rest of the population. If you had a score of 0, that just means that you're in the lowest percentile compared to the rest of the population. So some studies, one published in the European Journal of Human Genetics, showed that in a group of 191 obese individuals, those who were adhering to a DNA-based diet lost 33% more fat than those who were simply calorie counting. Another study out of the University of Toronto showed that people became more enthusiastic and more engaged when they were disclosed their genetic information, ultimately making them more excited about the diet and exercise process. 2 potential solutions for the problems that I first introduced you to today. More studies out of the University of Manchester showed that athletes who were training on a genetically matched exercise program boasted 50% increase in their performance gains than those on a one-size-fits-all approach. A follow-up study to this showed that those on the genetically matched diet only lost about 15% of those performance gains, while the one-size-fits-all group lost up to 50%. Not only do you gain more results, but they stick with you for longer when you work with your body instead of against it. Ladies and gentlemen, the future is in our DNA. Unlocking our genes is going to revolutionize the dietary industry and ultimately destroy the one-size-fits-all approach. The number of traits that we're able to measure and their accuracy is going to grow exponentially. Not only will we be able to design you meal plans based on your macronutrient breakdown, but but we'll be able to tell you exactly which foods work best for you. Apples over oranges, squats over lunges. Optimally, we want to be able to design your diet down to the very grain of rice. Again, the future is in your genes. Thank you.